Okay, great. So my name is Lauren.
And I'm Lilian, and we've been working on the Arctic Energy Atlas project. And today we're going to be talking about evaluating transmission line path and cost. So over the past decade, I think we've all seen a really big global shift in looking at sustainable energy solutions. So whether that's through renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, or hydrokinetic power, or optimizing our existing energy usage, this goal can pose a lot of significant financial and political challenges. And even more, the Pan-Arctic's incredibly unique landscape of politics can make this goal even more daunting. And so the idea of interconnecting transmission lines has been discussed before, but not really feasible with the technology at the time. Now that we do have the technology, especially on the geospatial side of things, we have the tools to do so and explore even more alternatives in this space. This project hopes to improve energy accessibility, sustainability, and national security as a whole.
So coming into this project, the main goals that we wanted to achieve were we wanted to improve our understanding of how different factors impacted how we plan grids and what those factors might look like in the future. So how do things like climate change, how does inflation impact how we build transmission lines, and how does it impact what those transmission lines cost? And oh boy, to add on to that, we also wanted to refine current cost estimates for building transmission lines in the Pan-Arctic. Some of you may have heard the number $1 million a mile thrown out before, but this number is actually really outdated and so it needs to be brought up to speed. So ultimately, we wanted all the data and tools that we used in this project to go towards better decision-making tools for energy authorities.
Yeah, so looking at the bigger picture, we hope that we can develop the tools necessary for power expansion, which will help visualize and inform policy decision making. And by doing so, we can more effectively address the energies that are rooted in energy inequality that are present in systems like transportation, health services, education, and much more.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea on the path that our data is taking on this project, we'll start out by collecting geospatial data from public sources. From there, we can refine some of that data in tools like Google Earth Engine or QGIS, which are open source. And then we can start to build up a friction surface. And I'll talk about that more in just a moment. But using these friction surfaces, we can extract the best potential lines for future transmission lines.
Yeah, and so after we extract those lines, we want to feed them into a cost calculator, which will give us a rough estimate of how much it would cost to build those transmission lines. And after doing that, because we're looking at this at both an Alaska and Pan-Arctic scale, we will be repeating this process multiple times.
Yeah, and so over the course of the summer, we've been able to get to here. So we've been able to collect all of our geospatial data necessary to the project. We're finishing up our friction surfaces, and we're getting ready to start extracting some potential routes. So like I just mentioned, the primary tool that we're using to look for transmission line routes is something called a friction surface. And the concept behind a friction surface is really simple. It's just a way of expressing that some surfaces are going to be more difficult to move across than others. So if I want to build a transmission line from point A to point B, what I can do is set up a friction surface that runs in between them. And this friction surface will contain information of the types of terrain that's in between there and potential hazards. And we can assign a weight to each of the cells in this grid. And the weight corresponds to the difficulty it takes to move across this space. So the higher the weight, the more difficult. We're building these friction surfaces at two primary scales. We're building them at a Pan-Arctic scale, which includes any country that has a border to the Arctic Ocean, and also the Alaskan scale. And the primary things we want to consider when we're building these friction layers is that we want to consider the slope of the terrain we're costing. The slope of the terrain that we're crossing, the distance from existing road infrastructure, what the land we're crossing looks like or is used for, and then specifically at the Alaskan scale, we also want to consider if we're crossing certain kinds of BLM land, because this can accrue a higher cost down the road. We can also decide if we want to add in factors like national borders and the conditions of permafrost in the area, because this is something that can add to cost or regulation complications down the road. After we've built up this friction surface, we can then run a least cost path across it. So what a least cost path does is it runs from our point A to our point B, and it'll find the way that is cheapest for it to move across, or the lowest weight cost to get it complete. So this is what a least cost path would look like on this very simple friction surface.
So after we get the lines from the friction surface, we want to get the cost of what it will take to build those transmission lines. And so I've broken this up into 3 little categories. So first one is the qualities of the transmission line. So these can include things like the voltage type, which range from 69 kilovolts all the way up to 600 high voltage DC kilovolts. We're also looking at the conductor type, structure, how long the transmission line is, and the age. I'm also looking at miles of different train types. So when we are building the transmission line, so if we are building it over a mountain, it's going to cost significantly more than if we're going through something like a main road. And lastly, a lot of other things can incur costs to the overall estimation, which can include right-of-way widths, inflation, project line losses, and any overhead contingencies. And so what I've been working on over the summer is the transmission cost calculator. And so all the factors that I had talked about before are weighted and integrated into an initial base cost. And with the help of a collaborator, Mark Foster, he created a really incredible spreadsheet that does all the calculations for us. So I've translated that into Python, where users can input things like miles of train type and the qualities of the transmission line. And so now you all might be curious about why we're making this in Python when we work at Excel. The answer is that Python makes the calculations super versatile in case you want to make optimizations or any changes in the future. And we all love really complicated Excel sheets, right?
So just to give you an idea of what some of the geospatial data we've been working with looks like, this is just a map on the Alaskan scale of some of our data. Give it a second to cycle through. But we'll start out with a map of the slope of the terrain. We break this into different categories. We can add in also land use. And then this last shiny layer you'll see come in. This is the logarithmic distance to get to road infrastructure. So this is what some of our maps will look like and some of our friction surfaces will be comprised of when our paper comes out next spring.
I think I've learned a lot of new technical skills, especially on geospatial side, since I hadn't gotten much exposure to that before. And I've also programmed in Python for the first time professionally. Super exciting. I was also part of the NSF strand for the internship, so I get a lot of new valuable insights onto Alaska's energy and infrastructure and the history behind it.
Yeah, and I was also able to build up some really great geospatial data skills and programming skills as well. I hadn't programmed much before, especially in a professional environment. I was also able to gain a much better understanding of culture around energy and grid expansion in both Alaska and internationally, because ultimately we hope that this project is something that can contribute to better grid development in many countries, not just here in America and in Alaska.
I think we both also really enjoyed being a part of the interdisciplinary team. I'm from a math CS background, and Lauren is from environmental science. And so we both collaborated a lot and learned a lot from each other this entire summer.
Yeah, and so like Lilian said at the beginning of this presentation, interest and investment in energy, specifically Arctic energy, is increasing, and we want to be able to give better tools and better data where it's important. So Lilian and Mark's cost calculator is something that will be eventually published. And when it's published, we hope that this contributes to better transparency around types of things like this. We also hope that the tools we've built over this summer will be something that can contribute to more consistent and streamlined grid development. Better data means we can make better informed decisions down the road.
Yeah, just to wrap things up, transmission line development is really critical at this time as the climate is changing super rapidly, and this can impact people, especially those in rural communities who don't have reliable access to energy yet. And so to safeguard national security, the estimation of transmission line development is really important. And we also have to give a lot of special thanks to our mentor, Erin, Nicole, Mark, and David for all of their amazing expertise and guidance this summer. Thank you.
We have time for any questions. We'd love to take them.
Have the friction surfaces been pretty, have the results of the friction surfaces been pretty intuitive, or are there areas of like, oh, that doesn't make sense, but think about it more?
So the question was, are the components of the friction surfaces we've been building intuitive? And to answer that, we're still in the process of building them, but the data we're building them with is really good data. It's coming from public sources that have already been vetted. And so that definitely contributes to results that make sense, or at least have an explanation for why they might not make sense. Does that answer your question?
I think we have a few more questions online, but we do have to keep moving. So you guys should definitely follow up with Chandler and Felicia. We'll have questions about your presentation. Fantastic job. Let's give another round of applause. Good job, guys.